data, which contains Bob's name, his employee ID, the device ID, the IP address where Bob is used to or is commonly connecting to, the location of Bob, and also Bob's role. Of course, with the role, we are tying up also the permissions that a manager could do, or the resources that a manager can access. Then we also have, or we are also storing the device data. On the device data side, we are storing the device ID, of course, the type of device. So let's say this is a Surface device. And then what's important here, or very critical here, would be yung last device date time. Sorry, this one, last device scan date time. So it says March 9 yung last time na na-scan yung device ni Bob, right? Let's say March 9 last nag-kick in yung antivirus, thereby hindi na updated yung health ng device. Then we also have the activity logs. So for here, we have the time that Bob last accessed a particular file share, ano yung device na ginamit niya, and yung user ID na ginamit ni Bob. Okay, so those are all the informations that are stored inside the data store. Now inside the policy engine, we have a rule, a business rule that says deny all requests from devices which are not scanned in the last 24 hours. Okay, so that you configure inside your policy engine. And then also on the trust engine, you also have a rule that says if there is no MFA, if the user did not perform MFA, then I am giving you a moderate risk score. Again, the higher the score, the more riskier it is. So from here, we can make use of machine learning models, to develop these kinds of knowledge base or these kinds of graph for the machine learning or for the trust engine to consume. So from here, because we now have all of these rules configured inside the control plane. So starting with Bob's request, right? Bob, of course, coming back to Bob's request. Bob's request is that I'm accessing a file share on March 12, 2 p.m., which is pasok siya dito sa office hours. It's not yet after office hours, but the device health of the endpoint was not scanned, right? So also there is no MFA, right? So no MFA, and then the device health was not scanned because yung last scan niya was March 9, outdated na. Dapat March 12 yung last na scan date ng device. Okay, so from here, from all of this information, this will be passed to the policy enforcement. Policy enforcement will determine that, oops, denied ka kasi hindi na-scan yung device mo, which will fall under the second rule. And then yung MFA mo rin is you don't have MFA, thereby you are given a risk score of 5. And then from your policy engine, you have another rule that says deny access to various resources like a file share or a printer when the risk is less than 7 out of 10, right? So because Bob has no MFA, the trust engine will give out a score of 5, which is technically less than 7. Thereby, the access will be denied. Okay, so again, see the verification process ongoing in between. In each stage of the request, there's some sort of verification, there's some sort of authentication happening to check the identity of Bob and also to check the health of the device that Bob is using. Okay, so next up, si Sarah naman. So Sarah is a developer within the organization. What if Sarah's identity and Sarah's device was also compromised? So Sarah sends out a request to access a particular endpoint, which is a database. So yung access, yung date time niya would be March 12, 2020, 2 a.m. And then, sorry, this is, I think, 2 p.m. during office hours. So, and then wala ding MFA si Sarah because wala nga siyang, it was a compromised identity. So technically walang MFA. She's using a iMac, and then the ID would be 234. That would be passed again on the policy engine. And then again, trust engine will give out a score, of 5 kasi walang MFA. And then on the policy engine, you also have a rule here that says deny access to high business impact resources like servers unless just-in-time access is granted by a approved administrator. Okay, so even if Sarah has potentially can access a database, because we have just-in-time access, there should be someone within the organization to also approve the request. So if I'm Sarah's manager, for example, dapat may workflow yan na magti-trigger na makaka-receive ako ng email that says Sarah is trying to access this database, and then I will decide whether to approve it or not. Because there's no approval by a admin and the MFA has not been granted, thereby the decision again will be denied, right? So Sarah will be denied, and then of course the software or the application that you use for Zero Trust should have the capability to provide justification.
All right, sir. We have a question.
Oh, okay. Sorry, any questions?
We have a question, sir, about here in the chat box down below. AAS ba ang mga policy engines in via cloud or on-prem software lang?
Okay, so that's actually a very good question. Well, maraming implementations kasi later on when we go through yung mga implementation ng various vendors, maraming ways on how to do it. But most commonly nowadays, it's usually a SaaS application because of course we're now running on the cloud. Most likely it will be a SaaS application running on the cloud or provided by a cloud vendor. Pero meron din kasi mga on-prem na solutions for Zero Trust. May mga CyberArk technologies. I think SolarWinds has their own implementation as well. So these are on-prem softwares that you could purchase to provide Zero Trust implementation for your organization. Yep.
All right, sir. Thank you po. So we're gonna get back a little while later for the official question and answer portion.
Okay. Sige.
Right, sir.
Thank you. Okay. So again, going back to the scenario of Sarah, right? So technically the request was denied because wala siyang MFA, and then wala din approval yung just-in-time access niya. Okay. So some key points here, right, for Zero Trust. Number one, what organizations, what customers and users need to understand is that Zero Trust is a journey, right? So it's not a one-stop shop na bibili ka lang ng technology, automatic Zero Trust architecture ka na. Hindi siya ganun. It's a journey, and it also requires maturity on the end of the customers, on the end of the organization. Why do we say it requires maturity? Because of course, you need to have proper governance. You need to have proper automation tools. You must be making use of analytics. You must have a sound identity provider. You must have, a very good device and change management process for your data, for your applications and your network. And second is, this one is actually very important. Zero Trust requires a mindset shift. It really requires a change in culture, and it requires the support of top-level management. So Zero Trust mindset should actually come from top level, starting from the CEO up to the very last employee within the organization. Everyone should practice the Zero Trust mindset in order for this to work. Okay. It also requires cross-pollination between teams, meaning there should be collaboration between teams, right? Well, traditionally, we have our SysOps, we have our developers, and most likely, di ba, nagbabangayan yung dalawang yan. Developer, ang focus nila would be to make the application work, to develop the application. Si sysad naman would be to secure the application, secure the environment. And sometimes, for example, no matter how, for example, the sysad team, no matter how much effort they put in the infrastructure to practice Zero Trust, kung yung developer naman kumukuha ng mga frameworks, ng mga APIs na hindi pala secured coming from third-party vendors or coming from the internet, then still you're not able to practice full zero trust architecture. So you need to have cross collaboration. There should be unity. There should be, you should be working hand in hand between different teams to make this work. Okay. What zero trust is not as well, it's not a security solution that you can buy from a vendor, and it's not a single solution. Okay, so in my implementation across various customers, they might have, for example, using Active Directory as their identity provider or their data store. Then they are using a different solution naman to store information regarding their devices. They might be using, let's say, a third-party MDM solution, and that's okay, as long as you are able to integrate all of them into the zero trust architecture. Okay, so again, that's zero trust. I hope that's clear. No questions naman tayo, right? Are there any questions?
Sir, we have a question right here.
Okay.
The question is there an implementation po for CPU-based policy enforcement like Intel, SGX, or AMD SEB? So yun po, coming from Mr. Alvin Veroy.
Okay, thanks, Sir Alvin. Yeah, that's actually a very good question. Well, technically, I think you can do such kinds of implementations. You can look into the hardware-based capability of your resources to verify the the security. But I think the question would be, it would depend, or the answer would be, it would depend on the type of zero trust implementation or software that you are using. If your software, for example, if your zero trust application has that capability to look into the actual hardware, the actual component of a particular device, then you can surely do that. But yes, actually that's a very good, I think a very good practice as well, to look into the the processor itself to see or to check if it's tampered. Baka mamaya, I mean, you never know hackers right now. There's even this practice of virtualizing a part of the CPU wherein secured resources or secured computations will be done para hindi, or para sure na hindi natatamper or hindi yung integrity ng processes mo stays intact. So that can be done, but again, it would depend on what product, what software you're using to implement your zero trust architecture. Okay.
Right. So sir, are we catering Q&A questions right now?
Actually, I would prefer to have it at the end of the session, sana.
All right. So let's move on forward. So guys, for the question and answer for the Facebook viewers, a little while later na lang po, you may leave your questions down below, and facilitators from DACT will curate it and collect it for later answering by Mr. Hermes. All right, sir. So thank you po.
Thank you, guys. So again, that's zero trust. That's how we apply zero trust in a conceptual model. We now move on the different frameworks, standards, and guidelines that are out there to for us to to serve as our baseline in implementing zero trust architecture. Bakit may? Sorry, let me reshare my screen. Share. Okay. Sorry, can you see my screen? Nakita niyo po ba screen ko?
All right, sir. So pwede na po.
Okay. So again, we now dive into the different kinds of frameworks and guidelines. So first up, these are actually the list of just a number of the frameworks and architectures and guidelines out there that organizations and governments are following, right? So if you notice, mainly actually it's more in the US and the UK and Australia. So hopefully dito sa Pilipinas magkaroon din tayo ng sarili natin na framework for zero trust. But the most commonly used guidance for zero trust implementation would be, of course, coming from the National Institute of Science and Technology, or the NIST framework. We also have the Open Group framework, which applies for private organizations. So going back, I mentioned the Jericho Forum group. So they were actually merged into the Open Group, this open Group organization. So they actually kind of know how, or they have the knowledge of how to implement zero trust for enterprises. Then we also have the National Cybersecurity Center for the UK, which applies or actually is directed to government. Then Australian Cybersecurity Center framework, also for the Australia government. And then we also have the American Council for Technology, Industry Advisory Council for the United States government as well. So we will be going through them one by one briefly. So for the NIST implementation, or basically on their report on zero trust architecture, they are, if you read the report, what they're saying actually would be, these are the components of a efficient zero trust implementation. And if you've noticed, the components are kind of the same with what I have shown you a while ago. So we still have, the policy engine. We have the policy enforcement sitting between the untrusted and trusted network. And then, of course, you have the resources. Inside the control plane, hinati lang nila sa dalawa, yung policy engine and the policy administrator. So the policy engine contains all of the rules. Policy administrator will be the one implementing or enforcing the permission, either allow or deny. And then those information coming from the policy engine and coming from the policy administrator will then be used to come up with a policy decision point, right? That policy decision point will be passed to the policy enforcement to enforce whatever is the decision. And then on the sites, you have here various components. So you have your data access policy, your PKI, if you're using certificate-based authentication, let's say your identity management provider, you have your SIEM solution, activity logs, threat intelligence, all of those components. So basically what they're saying here is that you don't have to completely revamp your solutions, your existing solutions, to make zero trust architecture work. You could actually reuse them. So for example, you already have identity management. You might be using, let's say, Okta or Active Directory, or if you're on the cloud, siguro Azure Active Directory, or kung ano man yung mga identity providers na ino-offer ni AWS and ni Google, you could reuse those solutions. For your SIEM system, if let's say you're making use of Splunk or whatever SIEM solutions available out there, again, you could integrate that product into your zero trust architecture so that your policy engine has a lot of data points, right? So marami siyang data points, marami siyang mga information na pwede niyang pag-aralan in order for the policy engine to come up with a sound policy decision. Okay, so that's what the NIST framework basically says on the report. We also have the American Council for Technology Industry Advisory Council. This one naman, ang approach nila sa report nila would be, hinati nila yung zero trust security model across 6 pillars. So you have zero trust for users, zero trust for devices, for network, for applications, automation, and analytics. Then we apply the same principles of zero trust, the principle of never trust and always verify across these 6 pillars whenever a user or whenever a device accesses a particular data. Also, they're also advocating that zero trust requires continuous authorization, so that no matter where or when the request is originating, you're still able to verify the request, right? And also, they are also advocating the increase in visibility using analytics and machine learning across the network. So if you've noticed, there's a heavy emphasis on analytics and machine learning, because if this is done solely by humans, hindi siya kaya. Sobrang daming data point. We're talking about thousands, millions of event logs that you need to analyze in order to come up with a sound decision. Then we also have this Certified Information Systems Auditor Organization, who also have came up with their zero trust maturity model. So on this maturity model, basically, they are or they help organizations and governments identify where they are on their zero trust journey by dividing the components of zero trust across identity, device, network, applications, and data. And then for each component, meron mga maturity levels. So we have yung traditional, advanced, and optimal. So for example, for identity, if let's say you're an organization who are still using passwords, and then you're relying on MFA to provide secondary layer of authentication, pero wala kang way to automate the computation of risks, then you might be considered still as a traditional or you're still inside the traditional level of implementing zero trust identity. If you would like to be considered advanced or optimal, then of course you should have some, for example, ways of federating via cloud or on premises. And then you should also have the capability to do continuous validation. You should have the capability to make use of machine learning capabilities to provide real-time risk-based analysis for the particular identity, right? So using this model, it will help organizations to check where they are right now on their zero trust journey. Okay, so in terms of the maturity model, again, traditional would be usually you're still making use of manual configurations. You have static security policies in place. Compared to the advanced maturity model or the advanced stage, you are now using a centralized approach. You are making use of dynamic policy enforcements across all of those pillars. And then for optimal, it's now fully automated. You're now making use of various ways to automate the computation of risks. You're making use of automated ways to come up with dynamic policies and also automated ways to check the identities, the health of the various devices connecting to your network. Okay, then we also have the open group. Wherein they also have came up with the zero trust core principles. So this one naman, ang diskarte nila would be they came up with the different drivers on why you should do zero trust. So for example, if you have encountered a disruptive event or you found yourself in a geopolitical scenario, then that's one way or that's one measure on why you should look into zero trust. And then once you dive into zero trust, they have also identified the different kinds of requirements to make zero trust work. Ano ba yung tamang way of doing zero trust? So zero trust should be able to support remote work, for example. It should be able to comply to different kinds of regulatory requirements. It should have the capability to support any kinds of unpredictable behaviors within the network. And it should also have real-time response. So those are just some requirements of zero trust implementation. Then once you have fully implemented zero trust, they also have documented the full capabilities of zero trust architecture. So you have the capability to have adaptive identity. You have the capability to do threat reduction, risk avoidance. You're able to do automation of audits. You have policy-driven controls, and you have different kinds of secured zones within the organization. Okay. Then last would be the UK National Cyber Security Center. This one applies for the UK government. They also have came up with the zero trust architecture design principles, which is quite the same with all of those principles out there. But basically what they're saying is that in your zero trust implementation, you should include users, devices, applications, and data. You should be able to know your users and devices. You should be able to analyze the traffic of those identities, all of those components moving within the network. You should be able to have the capability to assess user behavior and the health of your devices. You should be able to enforce policies and also authenticate and authorize anywhere your users are located. Then, of course, heavy focus on monitoring of all of those entities. And then, of course, by default, don't trust any network, including your own network. And you should be able to choose whatever service, whatever platform to make your zero trust work within the organization. So as you can see here, zero trust implementation is actually technology agnostic. It should be able to work across various different components, different vendors, different implementations, as long as you are able to still enforce the policy of having a zero trust architecture. Then actually marami pang guidelines. We have the Forrester guidelines, we have the Gartner guidelines for zero trust, and also each technology vendors, service providers out there also have their own zero trust implementations and best practices. So Cisco, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, all of them are all, of course, advocating zero trust, and they have their different ways on how to implement zero trust within their individual ecosystems. Okay. So now we go to implementing zero trust. Of course, allow me to introduce to you the Microsoft zero trust principle and how do we do zero trust within Microsoft itself. So if we talk about the Microsoft zero trust principles, still the concept is the same. We advocate that organizations should verify explicitly. You should be able to attest the identity, the health of the device, the location, the data classification, and any kinds of anomalies that might be tied to a particular request. Then also, we advocate the use of least